Some 1,000 years ago, mention was made of a settlement called Weimar.
You could reflect over thousands of years what kind of spiritual center Weimar has been all the time.
It has had a rich history in art and architecture. But that is only a small part of the story of Weimar. A story that has featured such celebrated names as Johann Sebastian Bach, Herder, Sophie Wilhelmina, Nietzsche, and Gropius. And what of Weimar's citizens today? Will they be content with the reflected light of bygone glories? Or will they create something different, reflective of a new Weimar? Weimar is a pleasant, unhurried place. But you only have to look around a little to be reminded who once walked these streets. Located far from major trade routes, along a scenic but rather insignificant waterway, Weimar would seem to be a highly improbable choice to become a fixed star in Germany's cultural firmament. The town, in fact, entered history somewhat by default. When the Saxon Duke Johann Friedrich lost much of his lands, including the royal seat at Wittenberg, in the Battle of Mühlberg in 1547, he made Weimar the capital of his diminished holdings. He also became the town's first major patron of the arts when he was followed to Weimar by the noted Renaissance painter Lucas Cranach. Cranach's house still stands in the city center. The artist died after living there only a year, but it was enough time for him to begin one final masterpiece, a three-winged crucifixion scene. Martin Luther can be seen standing next to Cranach himself, who is being struck by a mercy-bringing stream of blood from the wounded Christ. The painting, housed at the city church of St. Peter and Paul, was completed by the artist's son. It was Weimar's first great contribution to European culture. In 1703 and again from 1708 until 1717, Johann Sebastian Bach was employed in Weimar as a court organist, violinist, and eventually concertmaster.
The design of the organ is by Professor Johann Gottlob Töpfer. He was the Weimar city organist and is considered the leading 19th century theoretician of organ construction. The organ has 2 keyboards and 2 pedals. We can read in one of Töpfer's reports an evaluation that an accomplished organist can mix registers in order to play music from greatly differing eras. What I'm going to play for you now is a composition by Johann Sebastian Bach from the so-called Little Weimar Organ Book, composed in 1717 in Weimar. It's the chorale prelude, Gelobet seist du, Jesu Christ, dass du Mensch geworden bist. Praised art thou, Jesus Christ, that thou have become human.
1717, disappointed when he didn't receive a promotion he was expecting, Johann Sebastian Bach left Weimar for good. The town seemed to reciprocate his lukewarm affection. Weimar would enjoy a far warmer relationship with another major talent, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. In 1774, Goethe became the literary sensation of Europe with his novel The Sorrows of Young Werther. Werther fashions became the rage throughout the continent. Some young people even emulated the lovesick hero's suicide. After the book's publication, Karl August, the Duke of Weimar, called on Goethe in Frankfurt and invited him to his little capital. The visit would last more than 50 years. Weimar must have been something of a shock to a sophisticated 26-year-old city dweller. It was a town of merely 6,000 souls, still walled as it was in the Middle Ages. The castle lay mostly in ruins, and everything was on a smaller scale than Goethe was accustomed to. Still, there were compensations. Duke Karl August was a genuine lover of the arts, as was his mother, the Duchess Anna Amalia. Her evening receptions, held in the so-called Widow's Palace, were eagerly attended by Weimar's leading poets, artists, and scholars. In addition to intellectual stimulation, court life offered luxury. The Duke had an extensive estate called Belvedere, just south of town. And the Duke's mother maintained a charming summer residence at Tiefurt. Goethe received a pleasant country cottage from the Duke and quickly began accumulating titles. The newcomer was appointed Minister of War, Minister of Arts, Minister of Mines, Minister of Finance, Director General of the Royal Library, and President of the Chamber of the Privy Council. His main job, however, seemed to be looking after the exuberant, fun-loving Karl August. For a man of Goethe's wide-ranging interests, the early years at Weimar were everything he could ask for. He was part landscape architect, part natural scientist, part firefighter, part judge, part personnel director, and part tax collector. So busy was he with public life that he nearly stopped writing, and in fact didn't publish anything until he'd been in Weimar for more than 10 years. Goethe did not lack for companionship either. In less than a year after his arrival, he used his influence with the Duke to have his friend Johann Gottfried Herder invited to Weimar as head of the city church of St. Peter and Paul. Herder was a leading philosopher of the Enlightenment, as well as a noted theologian, folklorist, and cultivator of beauty. He preached at the Church of St. Peter and Paul until his death in 1803, delivering powerful sermons whose messages could be distilled in 3 words: light, love, and life. Another and more controversial friendship of Goethe's was with Charlotte von Stein, an unhappily married lady of the court. Goethe moved into the center of Weimar in 1782. Gossip had it that it was to be closer to Charlotte von Stein, who lived just around the corner.
We know that Goethe was a great lover. His ideas of love were so wonderfully spread that I was very happy that we found also a composer who has composed, for instance, the farewell letters between Goethe and Frau von Stein.
Goethe wrote Charlotte some 1,700 letters. Their relationship was profound and intense, but was it platonic, as has been commonly supposed, or something more? If his friendship with Charlotte von Stein set tongues wagging, Goethe's affair with Christiane Vulpius positively scandalized Weimar. Not only did he take the pretty young woman of inferior social rank to live with him in his home, he compounded the mistake years later by actually marrying her. It is safe to say that Charlotte von Stein was not amused. Of all the relationships in Goethe's long and eventful life, however, perhaps none was more significant than his association with the poet and playwright Friedrich Schiller. When Schiller first came to Weimar in 1787, Goethe was cordial but distant. It was only when Schiller moved to neighboring Jena that the two began enjoying that true rarity, a deep and abiding friendship between two major literary figures. Schiller returned to Weimar in 1799, determined to start a new and happier life. Goethe, at the time, was director of the Court Theatre and eager at the chance to mount productions of his friends' plays. The Bride of Messina and Wilhelm Tell premiered here. But the collaboration between the two, productive as it was not fated to be long-lived. In 1805, Schiller died after a lingering illness. His death was a blow for Goethe, but he would go on to live for another 27 years and produce the immortal Faust, among other major works. When he decided in his youth to abandon a career in law and come to Weimar, it's doubtful that Goethe knew he would not only be transforming himself, but a society as well.
bin der festen Überzeugung,
I'm
dass
firmly convinced that Weimar would not have become what it is today without Goethe's creative spirit, if he had not lived and worked in this city.
mit dem Wirken Goethes,
Goethe's work and life in this city created an energy, a movement that continues even today.
die heute noch nicht zu Ende gekommen ist. So viel zu dieser einen Seite. Die zweite
So much
Seite,
for this one
wie hat
aspect.
Weimar Goethe
The other
beeinflusst?
question, how did Weimar influence Goethe? That's a more complicated question.
Da geht es ins
You're getting
Psychologische.
into psychological issues there.
Goethe, der große Geist, der aus
Goethe,
einer
the
großen Stadt
great
kommt,
intellectual
aus
who
Frankfurt
came
kommt,
from a
der
great city,
seine
from
Fühler
Frankfurt, who
in
sent
die
out
weitere
feelers
Welt
into the broader
ausgesteckt hat,
world,
zieht sich
suddenly
plötzlich
withdraws
ein
to a
kleines
small
Herzogtum,
duchy,
ein kleines
a small
Fürstentum,
principality,
eine kleine
to a
Stadt
small
mit 3.000
city
bis
with
4.000
3,000 or 4,000
Einwohnern.
inhabitants.
Warum hat er das getan?
Why did he do that? Why did he seek out this smallness and this
Die
independence?
Selbstständigkeit. Und soweit ich bin kein
As far as I'm not a scholar of literature, I'm not a philosopher, I'm an architect, I'm an engineer. As far as I can judge, he needed this area of activity in its smallness to be able to grow, to develop himself freely.
sich frei entwickeln und entfalten zu können. Das sind ideale
The
Voraussetzungen
conditions were
gewesen.
perfect.
In der großen
In the
Welt,
big
in
world,
Paris
in
oder in
Paris or
oder
in Berlin,
Wien,
or
er
even
hat ja
in Vienna,
Angebote gehabt,
yes,
dahin
he had
zu
offers to
gehen.
go
Die
there.
hat er
He
nicht
didn't take them.
wahrgenommen.
There, his
Wäre
personal
wahrscheinlich
free
seine
development
persönliche
probably
freie
would not
Entwicklung
have
hätte sich
taken
nicht so
place the
vollziehen
same
können,
way it could in
wie sie sich
Weimar.
in Weimar hat vollziehen können.
Although Goethe and Schiller had made Weimar a cultural shrine to many, it was still viewed as a provincial outpost by some. The historian Johann Gustav Droysen cautioned an acquaintance who was thinking of leaving Berlin for Weimar, how can one leave a great state and allow oneself and one's children to become stunted and degenerate? Droysen compared Weimar's atmosphere with the stagnant air in a room full of spinsters prattling about art. Fortunately for Weimar, not everyone felt that way. A new wave of creative talent was recruited to rescue the town from possible mediocrity. When Franz Liszt was appointed director of music in 1848, Weimar gained an artist of European status. Like Goethe before him, Liszt produced works of genius during his Weimar years.
And we in the musical world, we know that a lot of meetings in Weimar have taken place before. Franz Liszt worked there for a long time. And the spirit of that time still is there.
Liszt also enjoyed great success as a conductor, premiering such works as Lohengrin by the man destined to become his son-in-law, Richard Wagner. But like Goethe before him, he also offended Weimar society with his romantic life. For the sake of decorum, Liszt kept a room at the Hotel Elephant. But everyone in the small town knew that he actually resided here, at the Altenburg, with his mistress, the Duchess Carolina von Sayn-Wittgenstein. Given his unorthodox love life and an approach to music considered revolutionary by many, it was only a matter of time before there was conflict between Franz Liszt and his adopted home. After years of petty quarrels and bitter strife, the disillusioned composer resigned his position with the Weimar Theatre and left town in 1861. It was not to be a permanent separation, however. In 1869, Liszt was induced to return to Weimar to spend his summers, which he did until his death in 1866. Perhaps his most lasting legacy to Weimar was his ardent support for Germany's first orchestra school, housed in a former monastery. The school was the forerunner of today's Conservatory of Music, which bears his name. Karl Alexander founded the Grand Ducal Art School in 1860. He expected it to become a center of historical and genre painting. Instead, he got landscape artists. Their treatment of simple natural subjects became known as the Weimar School. A disappointment for the Duke, no doubt, but a gift to art lovers far beyond Weimar's borders. By 1900, Weimar had become home to approximately 30,000 inhabitants. There was growing prosperity, and the fame of its memorials and museums drew increasing crowds of tourists, as well as more permanent residents. The great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche lived here from 1897 until his death in 1900. The intellectual debate of the day, one that still echoes today, revolved around Weimar's future. Would it be dominated by the past or dedicated to the modern? Leadership for the latter view was provided by two recent arrivals, Harry Graf Kessler and the noted Belgian architect and painter Henry van der Velde. There was to be a new Weimar, one devoted to the renewal of literature, art and theatre. Kessler opened his home to scores of visiting celebrities such as Rainer Maria Rilke, Gerhard Hauptmann, André Gide, Edvard Munch and Auguste Rodin. Van der Velde dramatically changed the face of Weimar with his mastery of the Jugendstil or Art Nouveau style. It was an exciting period of intense creativity, but it was not to last long. Kessler eventually fell out of favor, as did van der Velde. The tenure of his successor, Walter Gropius, was even more controversial. Gropius' idea that art could be melted compatibly with industry led to a revolution in the fields of architecture, art and design that reverberates to this day.
I think it's interesting that this school didn't start in the capital, Berlin, in a cultural capital of Europe. It started in the province.
I think everybody knows that this is something like the cradle of modernity, or of modern building, or one of the places of birth of modern architecture. In the beginning, in 1919, nobody knew that because the beginnings were rather unconventional, seen from today, and in a way with the face to the past, because what they wanted in the beginning was to reconstruct medieval ethics of building, which is reflected in the name. Bauhaus was the name of the shops which built the big cathedrals in the Middle Ages, right? Okay, after a couple of years, when they tried to reconstruct the ethics of craftsmanship and medieval building, they changed completely, and Gropius's ideas came through. It was his idea to, let's say, to put up with modernity. and to accept industrialization and to accept modern society and the way it produces goods.
Gropius gathered about him in Weimar a collection of talent that included Lionel Feininger, Gerhard Marx, Paul Klee, Wassily Kandinsky, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, and eventually Marcel Breuer and Mies van der Rohe. Gropius' marriage of art and industry may have been a success, but his relationship with Weimar was far stormier. From the beginning, he faced a ceaseless barrage of criticism. A group of professors in the old Grand Ducal Academy of Art challenged the legality of Gropius' rule and even went so far as to establish a secessionist academy in a wing of Gropius' own headquarters. To the good citizens of Weimar, however, Gropius' worst offense was importing students from Hamburg and Berlin. Their avant-garde ideas and appearances perpetually outraged the conservative sensibilities of their hosts. It would be hard to tell who breathed a larger sigh of relief, artists or townspeople, when the Bauhaus relocated to Dessau in 1925. Germany was a country in deep turmoil after the end of the First World War. As part of the armistice agreement, Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated his throne and a new democratic coalition government was created. Its leader, Friedrich Ebert, was determined to draft a new constitution for the nation. Berlin, the capital, would have been the appropriate choice for a constitutional assembly, but the city was so racked by strikes, unrest, and violent confrontations between its numerous political factions that, for the safety of the delegates, a new site for the meeting had to be found. The smaller and decidedly quieter Weimar seemed an inspired alternative. Here, in the same theatre where Franz Liszt conducted Lohengrin, Ebert convened the assembly. Amid hearty handshakes and official expressions of optimism, the Weimar Republic was launched with the adoption of a new constitution that was sound and democratic.
It's interesting that the Weimar Republic took its name from this city. But when the National Assembly came to Weimar to draw up the new constitution for the German Empire, resistance to the new republic and to the art and culture that came with it was already forming here in Weimar. Because it was not only the National Assembly that came here, but the Bauhaus began its work here too. That happened at the same time. The Bauhaus was supported by left-wing forces in Parliament, both in the Thuringia State Parliament and in the National Assembly. In a way, you can see the failure of the Bauhaus in Weimar as a portent of the later failure of the Republic. But of course, I don't believe, and I don't think any other historian in Germany does either, that the end of the Weimar Republic was predestined. I mean that it had to happen that way. I don't believe there has ever been such a thing as predestination in the history of the world anyway. The Republic definitely had a chance of succeeding in Germany and also in Thuringia. There were large segments of the population who were in favor of building a new society, who were disappointed in the monarchy, in the German Empire, who were frustrated by the end of the war. So there was a big majority for a new beginning. But the expectations placed on the new Republic were so high that it would have been hard for any new democratic parliamentary government to meet them. Correspondingly, people quickly grew frustrated. And there's always a large group in the population made up of the elite above all, nobility, civil servants, the middle classes, who were anti-republican to begin with and didn't want to become Democrats. The interesting thing about Weimar is that both these groups, the supporters and the enemies of the Republic, were in Weimar, in the city and in the state of Thuringia, and carried out decisive battles here.
Visiting Weimar in 1932 to attend ceremonies marking the 100th anniversary of the death of Goethe, the famous novelist Thomas Mann took worried note of the proliferation of Nazi flags and anti-Semitic sentiment throughout the town. Mann's fears were not unfounded. Support for democracy in the town where it was born was decidedly lukewarm, associated as it was with failure. It is not necessary to dwell on Weimar during the Second World War. The town exhibited about the same degree of bravery and foolhardiness as did its neighbors. It is on a symbolic level that Weimar stands out.
And of course, the city was at that time partly destroyed, although the war was not so cruel at that part of the country of Germany. But you found from beginning on, even after the Second World War, a kind of still peaceful world. You could go to Goethe's garden house, you could go to the White Swan, you could go to the famous hotel of the Elephant, you could see the Herder Church partly damaged. But at least the spirit of this great city was there.
For if the humanism of Goethe and Schiller is an integral part of Germany's national story, so, sadly, is the inhumanity of Buchenwald. The pleasant view from Buchenwald belies the evil that took place here. From 1937 to 1945, 60,000 inmates lost their lives here. There followed a liberation. From 1945 until 1950, Buchenwald was used as an internment camp by the occupying Soviet forces. Weimar had entered into a new phase in its history.
I believe that everybody living in Weimar is confronted with that. And it was at the beginning for us to remember that all what happened in the Second World War time through German people outside was an absolute contradiction against what Weimar represents.
Also ich denke erstmal zum Verhältnis Weimar-Buchenwald.
About the relationship of Weimar to Buchenwald, you might say that doesn't go together, the greatness of classicism and the plunge into barbarity. On the other side, you have to remember that those up there who killed approximately 60,000 people from all over Europe, they also considered themselves people of culture. so persecuting people and reading Goethe did go together. And Weimar and Buchenwald also fit together because the top Nazis that brought Buchenwald here, above all Gauleiter von Sauckel and his followers, definitely believed that it was possible to preserve the classical heritage and still annihilate the supposed enemies of that heritage. You could say cynically that they were also working on behalf of German culture. We of the post-war generation see that differently, of course, judge it differently. For us, the duality of Weimar and Buchenwald is more a problem, a continual responsibility to investigate, to ask how it really belonged together.
Eine dauernde Aufgabe nachzufragen, wie es denn wirklich zusammengehörte.
What were the years of GDR life like? If you listen to one line of propaganda, the people of Weimar were living in a workers' paradise. The other side denounced it as a terrorist state. What did actually take place with regard to the arts?
And I'm very happy to say that still in the time, as I lived there in East Germany in the GDR time, it was strong enough desire to rebuild a lot of their buildings. So it was already done at that time. And that it now starts to go on and make this city even more beautiful than it has been at that time.
Dass die Stadt Weimar in der DDR-Zeit war natürlich zunächst einmal eine Stadt.
The city of Weimar in the GDR period was, of course, first a city like any other in the GDR, so to speak. I don't want to talk about the general conditions, they're pretty well known, but rather the special aspects of this city, which existed as well. And this specialness simply had to do with the fact that the city had a cultural tradition that had been systematically preserved and maintained, and also presented to the world practically since Goethe's death. So the very strongly politicized GDR government decided to establish major cultural cities in the little GDR, in addition to the political capital Berlin, and Weimar became one of these cultural metropolises, as did Dresden. That was the special thing about Weimar, where of course citizens lived who were normal people, like in other cities as well. And there was a certain tension between the fact of this special aspect of the city, whose appearance made it a center of cultural tourism, although over time that actually made it less important.
Kulturtourismus wurde im Laufe dieser Jahre sogar dadurch eine gewisse Belanglosigkeit durch diesen zunehmenden Tourismus bekam, aber natürlich auf der anderen Seite dieser Tourismus.
But on the other side, the tourism brought foreign currency into the state coffers. And the result was that Weimar could renovate more buildings than others, at least superficially.
Auch mehr Gebäude renovieren.
Those are perhaps a few special aspects.
Das sind vielleicht ein paar solche Besonderheiten.
And also a cultural elite, so to speak, lived in this city. And they, and it's really important to say this, of course were instrumentalized.
Nun natürlich politisch zum Teil instrumentalisiert wurde.
On the one hand, solidly in the archives, in the libraries. And now something I want to say about that. Through the wall, through the isolation, we're able to work particularly intensely and concentratedly on the topics that were offered here in the city, in the historicism of the city.
In der Geschichtlichkeit der Stadt anboten, arbeiten konnte.
Weimar entered another new phase of its history with the fall of the wall in 1989. The reminders of the German Democratic Republic still linger, even if the Russian presence has all but disappeared.
The buildings here in the background are a former barracks complex. Russian soldiers lived here during the GDR period. They've gone home now, of course, and we're trying to redevelop these areas. We haven't succeeded completely yet, but there are already some positive examples that could be demonstrated using this model, where you can see what can be done with such buildings and entire complexes and the good things that can come out of it.
In many respects, Weimar finds itself in a similar position at the end of the 20th century as at the beginning. Again, there is talk about a new Weimar. Once more, there is a debate about whether to emphasize the past or to look ahead to the future.
der Architekt und Denkmalpfleger, der sich
The architect and preservationist who deals with historic substances wants to preserve this physical substance or spatial substance for future generations, maintain it, take care of it, so that one can understand the future by understanding the past.
Das ist die eine Seite.
That's one side. And the significance of Weimar classicism, with Goethe, Schiller, Herder, Wieland, and all the cultural developments that followed, up to Liszt and Friedrich Nietzsche, those are effects of this classical period.
Das sind ja Auswirkungen dieser klassischen Periode, dieses gesamte kulturelle Ereignis.
This whole cultural experience became so significant, not only for Weimar, but also for Germany, for Europe and the whole world, that every year up to 1 million people from these areas come to us with the desire to experience and understand it. Because humanity knows this is a piece of world history, a piece of the history of humanity. Let me put it like that very simply. I'm convinced that this history is of great significance for the development of the human race.
Von großer Bedeutung.
It might be expedient to survive on tourist dollars by turning Weimar into a kind of historical theme park, a Goetheland. But to many people, that is an unpalatable choice.
From today's perspective, tourism has to focus not just on the classical period, in my opinion, but also offer more to the many tourists who are interested in coming to Weimar, whom we want to show the beauty of the city as well, and the variety of attractions.
If Weimar is going to enter a new era of prosperity, it will not be through tourism alone. For one thing, it will have to expand its business base.
Developments here in Weimar have stabilized both at work and outside of it. Privately, things were difficult too for several years. The infrastructure was weak. There weren't the recreational opportunities, for example, sports, that I was used to in the old states. You can enjoy your work, but that's not enough by itself. There have to be a reasonable number of things to do outside of work.
Weimar will also have to address many unresolved social and political issues. And it will have to decide how it can become internationally known for its cultural life, and if it really wants to. Weimar's efforts to reinvent itself did not go unnoticed by the outside world. The town was selected to be the European City of Culture for 1999.
First off, I have to say that Weimar is the smallest of all the cities of culture so far. We have 62,000 inhabitants, but we offer as much as a city of 620,000, as people here say. We're also the first city of culture from the former East, with all the problems and structural weaknesses that come with that. At the moment, we're in the middle of an enormous construction effort that will allow us to present our city in 1999 the way a city of culture should.
It may sometimes seem that the rate of change is overwhelming, while other times nothing seems to have changed very much at all. This is Weimar today, a city at a crossroads. It has been an object of affection and contempt. And now what? 50 years from now, what images will the name Weimar evoke? The home of Goethe? An ill-fated republic? Or something else? We can't supply the answers today. That challenge belongs to the men, women and children who live in a special city located at a crossroads. A modern-day Renaissance city?
What you can say about the city, that it will be a cultural center again, and a cultivated city is necessary and is wonderful because at least it gives an example for whole Germany that we should never come into the danger that we underestimate the role of culture, of poetry, of music, of paintings, of everything what makes life worthwhile.